Thank y'all. Thank y'all very much, Sean, or I should say Emmett. Thank y'all very much for that very generous introduction. I do want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. And as our state treasurer from Ohio, as Josh did so well, I also want to commend the moms in this room. And the reality is we have a bunch of moms from Louisiana, I know from Ohio and other states as well. I not only want to commend them for their diligence, their courage, their persistence, but I want to tell you, many times when they've showed up to testify to the local school boards, when they've showed up to the legislative halls, they've not been treated with the respect, with the courtesy they deserve, not only as citizens, but as moms that are there for their children. So I want to thank them. We met together yet again on Monday, and I said, we're going to respect those that we disagree with. We're not going to call them names. We're not going to belittle their motivations. We're going to fight them based on substance, on reason, on intellectual arguments. They can call us every name they want, but we're going to respond point by point with fact-based arguments. But I don't believe we would be here without the moms in this room. Let's give them another great round of applause for all that they're doing. And to you dads out there, we do need a few more dads showing up for the fight as well. That's not to let you off the hook. That's right. I want to thank Sean for his tremendous, and really the entire group for your tremendous leadership on this project. You know, as I thought about my remarks, I've gotten to know Sean. I consider him a friend. I know that those of you that know him to be a shy, kind of, soft-spoken guy that's afraid to, no, I'm just joking. That's not Sean at all. He is a very honest and a principled leader who is unafraid to speak his mind, whether that makes him popular with his professional or social colleagues or not. And so when thinking about what I wanted to say today, I thought, I could get up here and talk about Common Core and talk to you about the privacy concerns. I could talk to you about the standards concerns. I could give you a very technical speech. But instead, I want to talk to you big picture about why Common Core is such a mistake for the children of Louisiana, for the children of the United States. And in doing so, I'm going to talk about some topics you might think, what in the world does this have to do with Common Core? I'm going to talk about, for example, some remarks I made in London about the challenge posed by radical Islamic terrorism. I'm going to talk about Obamacare, and I'm going to tie it together about why I think it is so important that we keep Common Core out of our classrooms. So buckle up your seatbelts and enjoy the ride. We're going to go through a lot of different things. 3 areas I want to touch on. First, why we have public education in America in the first place. Secondly, the legitimate concern of the overreach of the federal government into our lives. And then third and finally, how important it is, as Josh and others have said, to focus on the children, not the adults when we talk about education. How important it is to empower parents, how important it is to have the dollars follow the child instead of making the children follow the dollars. And this is a fight about Common Core, but it's also about homeschooling and private schools and charter schools and school choice. This is a fight bigger than just about Common Core, but it's an important fight when it comes to Common Core. Let's start with why do we have public education in the first place? And I can think of 3 main reasons that we often think about in terms of why is it important for us to publicly fund and support and provide education. The first, and I think this is an incredibly important point, is that we're an aspirational society. Now, what does that mean? That means the circumstances of your birth don't determine your outcomes as an adult in this great country. You don't have to be born in the right zip code. You don't have to be born to wealthy parents. You don't have to have a famous last name. You don't have to be born in the right place to do great things in this country. My parents are living proof of that. My dad's 1 of 9. Grew up in a house without electricity, without running water. Was the only one, the first one in his family to get past the 5th grade. I know because we heard those stories every single day growing up. You try to ask a dad like that for an allowance. Good luck with that. But by the way, my parents' story is instructive. My parents, decades ago, get on a plane and leave all the way from halfway across the world, leave India to come to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I want you to think about something. They had never been on a plane before. There was no internet. My kids don't understand that, by the way, but there was no internet, no cell phones. They couldn't just Google America or Louisiana to find out what this new place was. My mom was pregnant with me, and they left behind their parents, their families, their friends, everybody they knew. And they came to this new place, and they never even talked to somebody who had visited Baton Rouge and could come home and say, let me tell you about the weather and the people or the food or any of those things. But here's what they had. They had in their bones this absolute conviction that America was a special place. They were coming to an idea as much as they were coming to a specific geographical piece of land, a place where there was freedom and opportunity, a place where if they got here and if they worked hard, their kids could have even more opportunities than they did. What's amazing to me, and I won't tell you their entire story, that's another story for another day, but what's amazing to me, they land in Baton Rouge. My mom studies at LSU. My dad literally calls companies in the yellow pages looking for a job. I don't know how many times they hung up on him or turned him down. He finally gets a job from a railroad company. Boss tells him he can start Monday. Hasn't even seen the guy. Hasn't even met my dad. My dad tells his new boss, hasn't even met his new boss, says, well, that's great. But he said, look, I don't have a car. I don't have a driver's license. You're going to have to pick me up on the way to work Monday morning. And his boss was so taken by his enthusiasm, he did that. 6 months later, I was born at Women's Hospital in Baton Rouge, where a couple of our kids were born, a great hospital. I was what you would politely call a pre-existing condition. They didn't have insurance to cover me. But I love what my dad did. He went and shook hands with the doctor and said, I'm going to send you a check every month until I pay this bill in full. No paperwork, no contracts, no signed forms, no government programs, just two guys in a hospital shaking hands. I don't know if that would work today. I asked my dad, I said, how do you pay for a baby on layaway? I mean, if you skip a payment, do they take the baby back? What do they do? I mean, he said, you were such a bad little baby, we would have skipped a payment if they would have taken you back. But he said, no, you're paid for. Don't worry about that. The reason I tell you that is they came to America in the search of freedom and opportunity. Unlike our current president's description of the American dream being all about redistribution and larger government and more taxes, they knew my dad would tell me every day, tell my brother every day, if you work hard, if you get a great education, there's no limit on what you can accomplish in this great country. He would tell us every day, you should get on your knees and thank God Almighty, you are blessed to be born in the greatest country in the history of the world. So one of the reasons we are so supportive, and one of the reasons we take education so seriously, is it goes to the heart of who we are as a people. We are an aspirational society. We all have stories like that, whether it was you, your parents, your grandparents, who were the first to get an education. There's a second reason we provide education, and it's an economic one. We've all seen the studies showing that if more of our kids get an education, our economies will grow. We can create billions of dollars, trillions of dollars of wealth by improving the educational attainment of our states, of our society. Indeed, we've all seen the studies of how we lag compared to international comparisons in terms of advanced countries, in terms of their math scores and their scores against our children's. In Louisiana, I'm proud that we have cut taxes. We've cut the size of government, reformed ethics. 70% of the companies want to move or expand in my state. To me, one of their top two concerns is being able to find a skilled worker. So education is important. You hear it from chambers of commerce, you hear it from business groups. We've got to provide education so that we can continue to grow the economy. And just as states compete on everything else, I'm glad that we've got lower taxes. I'm glad we've reduced the size of government. We also compete in terms of the quality of our education. And we've done a lot of things in Louisiana to invest in our community and technical colleges and do other things to be able to compete with other states. But there's a third reason we educate our children. I think this is incredibly important. And this is really historically the primary reason, before all others, that we educate our children with public dollars, with tax dollars. The reason that we think this is a public responsibility more than just the responsibility of an individual family. And that's because we live in a self-governing society. If we want to keep the republic that we have, our government can only be as good as our citizens. And the reality is that means we need an educated population, equipped with critical thinking skills, equipped with the ability to select and hire and fire our own leaders. One of the great things about America is we get to choose our leaders. We get to hire them and fire them through our elections, through our democratic government. And I want to talk for a few minutes about why it's so important that we choose good citizens and why the idea that through Common Core, we would allow for the first time in our nation's history for the federal government to be making curriculum decisions in violation of the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, in violation of long-established federal law, why that is so dangerous to this third and extremely important function of education. Now, I promised you I'd get to my speech in London. I gave a speech a couple of weeks ago in London. And I know it got a lot of attention. I'm not here to re-deliver that entire speech. I made some points about the danger we face from radical Muslim terrorism. I talked about the fact that Muslims got a problem. Not that I believe that the majority of Muslims condone these barbaric acts being done in the name of their religion, but I did say individual Muslim leaders have a responsibility. to denounce not just the acts of violence, but these individuals, to say they're not going to enjoy a reward in the afterlife, but rather they're going straight to hell for these awful, barbaric acts they continue to commit. Killing school children. Killing teenagers for watching soccer, burning a man alive, killing cartoonists because they don't like their products. But I also went further. I also said to the leaders of the Western world, we have a responsibility as well. We have a responsibility to insist on assimilation and integration for those who want to come and live in our societies. And this used to be fashionable. This used to be common sense to say, for example, that America was the great melting pot. When I was a school child, we proudly proclaimed that. When I was in college, we were talking at my table about the political correctness movement. It's nothing new. Even when I was in college, there was a move to say we're no longer the melting pot, we're the salad bowl. And the idea behind that is that it's somehow culturally arrogant. It is somehow a colonial attitude. It is somehow racist to tell people that if you want to come to America, we insist that you come to be Americans. Now, to me, it's nonsensical that we allow people to come into our societies and use the freedoms we give everybody to undermine those very freedoms. Now, we're a majority Christian country with a Judeo-Christian heritage, but we don't discriminate against anybody who wants to come and live in our country and follow our laws and adopt our values. What does that mean? That means we should be unafraid to teach English in our schools. That means we should be unafraid to insist that when people come here, they're not here to set up their own cultures, to overtake ours, but rather to become a part of America. And by the way, I'm against this whole hyphenated idea. You know, we're not Indian Americans, we're not African Americans, we're not Italian Americans or Irish Americans, we're Americans. My mom, my dad, they love their heritage. They're proud, they love India. But my parents would tell me when we were growing up, they'd say, if we wanted to raise you as Indians, we would have stayed in India. We came here to raise you as Americans. But this gets me back to Common Core. Now imagine if you have an elite in D.C. making curriculum decisions for our local classrooms. And this is more than a theoretical question. What happens when we stop teaching American exceptionalism to our students? What happens when American history is not the American history you and I learned about, but rather it becomes a history of grievances, of victimhood? What happens when we stop teaching our children that America truly is the greatest country, not only in the world, but in the history of the world? That we are an exceptional country, and that we do have special attributes, and the reason we are so special, just by the way, it's not because there's something magical in our soil or in our DNA. I'm glad that we are blessed by these two great oceans on our borders, but that's not what makes us such a unique and special and a great country. I think what defines so much of American exceptionalism is that our founding fathers got it right. They understood the idea of a limited government wasn't to create our rights, but was to secure our God-given rights, which is why they imagined a limited central government. Now imagine what happens when the federal government decides they get to make curriculum decisions. What happens when our elites, the same elites, by the way, that have already infected much of the curriculum in higher education, begin reteaching American history, begin to say that no longer is there American exceptionalism, we're merely one in the nation, the world, the family of nations. What happens when they no longer want to talk about assimilation or integration or our heritage or our values? We insist today that if people come into our country, they should respect the right of self-determination, religious liberty, and freedom of speech for others. Yet some of these values aren't very fashionable according to the elite that infect our media, our government, and certainly Washington, D.C. So my first point is this, and that transitions me to my first point is this. The whole point, the reason we have publicly funded education, as opposed to simply telling families, yes, this will help you earn more money, therefore you should go educate your children. There's nothing wrong with saying education is critical for an aspirational society. There's nothing wrong with saying education will help us develop our economy and improve our quality of life. But fundamentally, it is about self-governance. It's about teaching the next generation of citizens to be able to hire and fire their leaders and to become those leaders. And we risk it all, that American exceptionalism, if we allow the elites, oftentimes unelected, behind closed doors with no transparency, to dictate to us how our children are going to learn about American history and civics and so many other topics that are so important to creating that citizenry with critical thinking. And that brings me to my second point. In our lifetimes, in the last 5, 6 years, we have seen an overreach of government power that is unprecedented in our country's history, and I would argue to you that none of us would have thought possible just a few short years ago. Now, what do I mean by that? If I could travel through time and stand on this stage several years ago, and I said to you, do you really believe the IRS would go after conservative groups because of their beliefs? I don't think we would have thought that possible in our country. If I stood up here and said, do you really believe the Department of Justice is going to go and spy on AP reporters? I don't think we would have thought that possible. If I stood up here and said, do you really believe the same Department of Justice, through Fast and Furious, would be providing guns to Mexican drug cartels, even while our administration seems to oppose the legal, the constitutional gun rights of law-abiding Americans? We wouldn't have thought that was possible. If I were standing on the stage and said, do you really believe the Federal Department of Justice would try to go to court in Louisiana to shut down a school choice program, where nearly 90% of the kids come from minority families, and they all come from low-income families, fleeing from schools getting C's, D's, or F's, supposedly on the grounds of integration, supposedly on the grounds of the same laws that were designed to protect the most disadvantaged students in our country? We wouldn't believe that. If I stood on this stage several years ago and said, do you really believe our federal government was going to create a new entitlement program when we can't afford the ones we've got? It was going to put government bureaucrats between you and your doctor in the form of Obamacare. We wouldn't believe that. So I think parents are right to be skeptical and worried about an overreach by our federal government into our K-12 classrooms. Now, our opponents would tell us, they would mock us and say, what do you have to worry about? But I would argue, after what we have seen, all the broken promises, remember, we were told if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If you like your health plan, you can keep your health plan. Our premiums were supposed to go down $2,500. And the reality is we've seen broken promise after broken promise. We've seen an unprecedented expansion of government power, intrusion into our lives, telling us how the elites think we should be living our lives. And by the way, as a side note, I do have just a message, because this is not just a criticism of Democratic politicians in Washington, D.C. It's a criticism of our Republican politicians in D.C. as well. Right now, you've got an attempt by many in this city to say, well, we can't really repeal Obamacare. Never mind all the rhetoric, never mind all those promises we made on the campaign trail. Now it's time to govern. It would just be too difficult to get rid of all the tax increases and all the spending and the new entitlement program. It would be too disruptive. And so we're going to tinker around the edges. My message to the Republican leaders, the Republican Party, the Republican elected officials is, first, do what you promised us you were going to do when you asked us to vote for you. Secondly, don't become just cheaper Democrats. We don't need Democrat light. Quite frankly, I mean, if the whole point of this election was simply to get John Boehner and Mitch McConnell nicer offices, let's give them back. I mean, what is the point of having a Republican Party if it's only going to become a second liberal party in Washington, D.C.? We said, our candidates said they were going to repeal and replace Obamacare. That means all of it. That means you get rid of all the tax increases, you get rid of all the regulations, all the spending, all of it. And then you start anew and really, truly do what Americans want, which is to drive down the cost of health care. But that brings me to my second point. This overreach by the federal government into the local K-12 classroom. So now the Federal Department of Education, this is why we're in federal court, says, oh, by the way, if you want race to the top funding, you've got to endorse, you've got to embrace Common Core standards. Oh, by the way, if you want a waiver from No Child Left Behind, the onerous requirements, you've got to adopt Common Core standards. And oh, by the way, even though we're not supposed to be involved in all this, we're going to fund Park and Smart Balance, and we're going to actually give them tens of millions of dollars to develop their tests. And I do think, and I think you heard this from Emmett and others, that's exactly right. This warning about this whole reauthorization of No Child Left Behind, I didn't happen to be in Congress when it was first passed. I think it was a mistake back then. I think its reauthorization is a mistake today. It involves the federal government in local decisions where the federal government has no business being. And that brings me finally to my third and perhaps the most important point. When it comes to education, It really needs to be about the students, not the adults in the classroom. Now, in 2008, in my first year as governor, we fought hard. We had a Democratic majority in the House and the Senate. And we fought hard to get a school choice program in the city of New Orleans. And the idea behind this is the dollars would follow the child, not making the child follow the dollar. Now, fast forward 4 years later, my first year of my second term in 2012, my inaugural address, when we came in to office, literally my inaugural address, I told the folks there, I told the legislators there, my top priority was going to be K-12 education reform. Met with every single legislator. Invited them to come talk to me. I said, I'll talk to you about whatever you want, but before you leave my office, we're going to talk about education reform. And I won't bore you, but we did several things. Statewide school choice, we did course choice, we expanded charter schools, changed our tenure laws. But here was the common denominator. The common denominator was that we said we trust parents. No two children are exactly alike. Some children will do better by being homeschooled. Some children will do better in traditional public schools. Some children will do better in charter schools. Some children will do better in parochial schools, private schools, independent schools, Christian schools, dual enrollment programs, online programs. Some children will be doing better by going to a public school for part of the day and then taking private courses for the rest of the day. But ultimately, it's up to the moms and dads to decide what's best for each of their children. That was the common theme. And in the midst of this debate, and I still can't believe he said this, but I think this summarizes the debate perfectly. This summarizes the debate better than anything I could say about school choice, about Common Core, about education reform, about it all. One of our union leaders in Louisiana said this. He said, parents don't have a clue when it comes to making choices for their kids. Now, part of his defense was he said, well, he was talking about poor parents, as if that made it okay. I met with a group of moms the next day. And they came and told me, they said, Governor, one, we make choices for our kids every day. And secondly, we know the needs of our kids better than the bureaucrats in Baton Rouge or Washington, D.C. Now, I can't summarize this debate any better than that. Parents don't have a clue when it comes to making educational choices for their children. That's, to me, one of the most un-American things you can say about how we were supposed to be governing ourselves. Remember, if the whole point of this education is to train citizens to be functioning, responsible adults in a self-governing republic. I'll close with a couple of stories, and I'll be happy to take your questions. One from a mom and then one about a child. Because at the end of the day, I'm confident we're going to win. And I'm confident we're going to win not only because the information's on our side and the facts are on our side, but I'm confident because when more and more teachers and more kids and more parents are exposed to the fallacies of Common Core, our numbers continue to grow, and their numbers continue to diminish. The first story comes from a mom. And so this mom, it brought tears to my eyes when we were visiting. She's a single mom. She's an African-American mom. And she was describing to me, she came to meet me at an event to thank me for the school choice program that we had started. And this was her story in short. She had her daughter with her. I took my picture with her daughter, and she told me, she said, look, my mom had me as a single mom when she was a teenager and then went on welfare. She said, I got pregnant as a single mom, as a teenager, had my daughter, who's with me today, and then went on welfare. And when she came to see me, she said, with tears in her eyes, I'm working 3 jobs to help keep my daughter in the local parochial school where she attends. And she said, I couldn't do it without the scholarship program that's helping her to stay there. And she looked at me and said, this is the first time my little girl is coming home with homework. This is the first time she's actually safe, feels safe going to school. This is the first time there are supplies in the bathroom. This is the first time there are pen and paper in the classrooms. The first time she's even talking and thinking about, what do I do after I finish my K-12 education? This woman wasn't political. She wasn't there to tell me about this legislator or that committee hearing. All she wanted to know was this program going to continue to be there for her daughter? Now look, this woman, I happen to know where she lives. there's a really good chance she didn't vote for me. I'll put it this way. This is a precinct where 99.9% of the people almost always vote Democrat. If somebody voted for me, it was probably by mistake. She didn't come to visit me or meet me because she loves me being a Republican or loves me being a conservative. She may not agree with me on cutting taxes or a whole lot of other things. But she's a mom who wants her daughter to have a better quality of life than she did. She's a mom who wants her daughter to have a great education. She's a mom who wants her daughter to avoid some of the mistakes she felt she made in her life. And she's willing to work hard and sacrifice and do her part. She just wants the state to do its part. When I heard her story, it didn't sound all that different from my mom and dad, coming halfway across the world in search of that same opportunity. And so to the opponents, to the folks out there that are trying to push Common Core, I'd ask them to slow down, listen to these parents. Don't insult them. Don't tell them they don't have a clue when it comes to making choices. Hear their testimony, hear their stories. There's a reason they're so passionate. It's not about politics, it's about their children. My final story is this. The most compelling story for me came from my own child. He is now 8 in the 3rd grade. When I was laughing when Emmett was showing those slides about math, my little boy came home one day, and he came and talked to my wife first. My wife then turned to me and said, "You need to talk to your son." Now, to the dads in the audience, whenever your wife tells you your son, you know he's done something bad. You know, he's never my son when he's hit a home run at baseball or done, you know, it's my son when something bad's happening. So I said, okay, what did Slade do? Well, she showed me. He brought home a little test, a little math homework, a little worksheet that they got in class, and it was very simple math. He was in 2nd grade. He's 7 years old, and it was very simple. It was simple addition and subtraction, what you would kind of expect for a 2nd grader. And I was so proud of him. He'd gotten 100% right on getting the answers right. But now they were teaching, I guess now we got to call it the new math. It's not new math anymore. I guess it's new math, Common Core math. And instead of just adding the numbers like we were taught in a single column and carrying over the digits, you were now being taught that you had to draw diagrams. And so, for example, instead of 18 plus 4, it's 20 minus 2 plus 4. And you draw one set, like maybe circles for the 10 spot and rectangles for the 1 spot. And it's about 6 days. It's a pretty complicated algorithm to get from 18 plus 4 to 22. Now, I love my boy, but he's got the attention span of a gnat. I mean, he's a boy, and he's young, and that's what they do. And so he had just raced through the test, got 100% right in terms of getting all the numbers right. Didn't miss one of them, and he's good at math. But on the second half, to get the rest of the credit, you had to use these Common Core concepts. Basically, the instructions were explain and show why your answer is correct. And my little boy, then all of 7 years old, had wrote for every single answer, just because it is. Well, the teacher didn't know what to do with this, so she sent it home. My wife didn't know what to do with this, so she sent it to me. I sat down with him, and after about 30 seconds, I said, Slade, you did fine. Go outside and play. I mean, what do you tell a child like that in that situation? And we can laugh today, but I worry that frustration continues to build. If we teach kids that the intuitive way to solve math problems isn't the right way, if we send home reading texts that are supposedly Common Core approved, that offend parent standards. And my point is, and I'll close with this final observation, my point isn't that your kids need to learn the way that I want them to learn math, or that your kids need to read the text in their schools that I want them to read. Rather, my point is that local parents, local teachers, local leaders need to make these decisions. In our entire history as a country, we've never allowed the federal government to make these decisions for us. Now is not the time to start. Common Core is not worth breaking this precedent of trusting the American people, trusting moms and dads over these elite bureaucrats living right here in Washington, D.C. Thank you for your efforts against Common Core. Thank you. Thank you all very much.
You're suing the federal government. I'm suing a state government. Can we rely on the courts to push back this whole executive
That's a
overreach?
great question. And ultimately, no. I think we will be successful in court because we're right, but as we met just as recently as Monday in Baton Rouge with our moms, with our legislators, the point we made is, yes, we think we're going to win in court, but that alone's not enough. We also have to pass better laws at the state level to rein this in. And in Louisiana, for example, we're championing several efforts to go there and pass laws to have Louisiana standards and to empower parents so this doesn't continue to happen. I also would argue that we need to pay attention to who we elect. In Louisiana, we elect our judges, we elect our legislators, we elect our governor. We're going to have statewide elections this November. We need to pay attention to what candidates tell us. Just like I'd say to Republicans here in D.C., you promised us you were going to repeal Obamacare, now go do it. To candidates, I would encourage every mom, every dad, every voter to ask every candidate, whether they're running for president or Congress or school board or legislator, what are their thoughts on Common Core? And look, they don't have to be educational experts. A lot of people are going to try to tell you, well, I don't really understand the theory or the content. I'm not asking them to be curriculum experts. I just want to know, do they think that locals should be able to make these decisions, parents should have input in this, or do they think that this decision should be made in Washington, D.C.? So I think we'll be successful in our lawsuits, but no, you're right. We need to pass better laws, and we need to pay attention to who do we elect. In our state, we elect part of our education board who then hires our state superintendent of education. I would encourage voters to ask those candidates very, very carefully. We've had to issue several executive orders. So we had teachers who felt like they couldn't speak out about Common Core. So I had to issue an executive order on behalf of teachers. We had parents who want to opt out of park test. I had to issue an executive order on that. And in several instances, our state school board is challenging those executive orders. So again, who we elect, the laws we pass are extremely important. The courtroom alone is not enough. You go to the overreach of this federal government. Look, there's no way that I thought the individual mandate was constitutional. But there is one thing that this president seems to understand, except for this last November. He seems to understand that elections have consequences. So it matters who we elect to these different positions. Yes, sir.
You know, I'm a Cuban-born country boy. Picked up a few degrees along the way. Back in my country, we say that sighing don't make babies, but school boards do get involved, and there are very few people that need to get to school boards. We need people in our school boards. And it's really easy to get elected to a school board. In Sussex County, where we come from, in Delaware, about 500 votes get you in. So, we have to stop sighing and start doing. And I suggest that as many as can do go for their local school boards, where you not only take care of taxes, you also take care of how people learn.
I think that's exactly right. I'd say just a quick point on that. When it comes to education reform, historically this has been an asymmetrical fight. Now, what do I mean by that? The other side, they care deeply. Teachers' unions, when they show up at the legislature, they've got one issue they care about. And if they'll tell legislators, we don't care what else you do, but on this issue, you better not touch tenure, you better not touch this, you better not touch that. And so it's important for us when we get involved with campaigns, when we run for office, when we support candidates for office, we've got to care as well. One of the reasons we were able to get education reform done in Louisiana was we motivated people. We had people turn out that hadn't shown up before, including many of these moms and many of these parents. But the other side will fight back pretty hard. They try to recall our speaker. They try to launch various efforts against various officials who had the audacity to cross them. And I'll say this when it comes to getting involved as well, and you heard Josh say this, and this is so important for the Republicans in this room to hear. As Republicans, we're accustomed to saying we don't want to be the party of big government, and that's exactly right. But we've got to learn not to be the party of big business either. Crony capitalism is no better. And so in this Common Core fight, we are going to sometimes have people that we agree with on other issues fight us on this, but we've got to remember, we're not the party. It doesn't make it any better just because our folks are in the majority. It doesn't make it any better if they want to do backroom deals, carve-outs in the tax code, special contracts. And the Common Core fight's a great example that if we're really sincere and authentic, if we're true conservatives in terms of what that means, we have to be for empowering individuals, especially parents, when it comes to raising their children.
Governor, our negative program in this area, of course, is to defeat the Common Core for all the reasons that you've articulated. I wonder, though, based on your experience as a state chief executive, whether you have some thoughts you could share with us about the positive side of the program to raise educational standards. As an educator myself, I'm sometimes appalled, even where I teach at Princeton, that students will come in, sometimes class valedictorians with off-the-chart SATs and so forth, but will still be very deficient in American history, not knowing quite whether it was Grant or Eisenhower that was the Union general in the Civil War, and in some other areas as well, even outside of history and the civic area. Basic writing, for example. We at Princeton now have a mandatory, essentially remedial writing program for everybody. Not all students need it, but some do. What's our positive program?
Well, first of all, as a Brown graduate, it doesn't surprise me at all that Princeton's suffering this way. That's not everybody can get into the better, more selective schools. So that's every school's got its purpose. No, but on a serious note, this is a great question because too often our critics will come at us and say, well, if you're against Common Core, you must be for lowering standards, watering down standards. Nothing could be further from the truth. Now, I think it's important we reject that, and in terms of what does work. So I'm a big believer that choice and competition work in education just like they work in every other aspect of American life. So in New Orleans, just as an example, in New Orleans, over 90% of the kids are in charter schools. The Recovery School District, which is not just in New Orleans, is the first school district that has 100% of their kids in charter schools. In just a short period of time, they're able to double the percentage of their kids that are reading at grade level, and they're doing math at grade level. In a short period of time, when the critics would tell you, oh, this will take a generation, you can't make change overnight, the percentage of kids at failing schools fell dramatically. We've seen rapid increases in retention rates, graduation rates, the percentage of kids doing well on the AP exam in our state. Now, my point in saying all that is don't go out and make every child go to a charter school. There are good charter schools and there are bad charter schools. But by giving parents more choice, by forcing schools to compete, the fundamental mistake we make today in how we fund education is we fund programs. We fund bricks and mortar. And then we force the children to fit into those programs. So you take things like, for example, in this city, we spend a lot of money through Title I. And at the state level, we spend a lot of money on children who we think need a little bit of extra attention, either because they're disadvantaged, they have special needs, or maybe their education is more expensive because they're taking technical education. Too often, parents, one, don't get to choose how those dollars are spent on behalf of their kids. Secondly, too often those dollars don't even get to where those kids are going to school and benefit those students. So, one, absolutely, we should insist that we are for high standards. And in Louisiana, by the way, before there was No Child Left Behind, before there was Common Core, we had a bipartisan commitment, Democrats and Republicans, to high standards, to stop this idea of social promotion, to make sure our kids learn before they advance. But I think fundamentally there's no silver bullet. I hope nobody takes away from this that the governor of Louisiana is telling you, put every child in a charter school, put every child in a private school, make every child homeschool, put every child in a magnet program. My point to you is, let the parents decide. When the dollars truly follow the child, I think you're going to see amazing things happen. I think you're going to see parents vote with their feet and actually say, I'm going to move my children. So, for example, just a couple of anecdotal examples of innovations. For so long in education, we measure everything by seat time. So how do you know a child's ready to get to the next grade? Well, we look at how many hours and how many days. In Louisiana, it's 180 days for a school year, and we measure the number of minutes you've got to spend in every subject. And when a kid fails a grade, traditionally, you hold them back, and they get embarrassed after a couple of years. They're older than their peers. What a lot of charter schools have found out is if you do it based on competency-based learning rather than seat time, you can have a child that may be advanced in one subject, deficient in another, can do more than a year's worth of work if you actually focus on that child's needs. So no longer do you have a child that's falling 2, 3, 4 years behind. Indeed, many of these kids can do more than a year's worth of work. Too many of our educational programs are one-size-fits-all, where we truly don't focus on either the weakest or the best students, and we ignore the needs of all of those students. And so the real silver bullet, if there is a silver bullet, is choice, is empowering parents, is allow innovation to work. We've got an educational system, it's an industrial age, one-size-fits-all, top-down approach. Contrast this, my kids laugh when I tell, my kids are 13, 10, and 8. And so they laugh when I try to describe to them how we used to grow up watching TV. I'd say, look, you have to come home, there were 3 channels, there was an antenna, there was no remote control. I was remote control, and every now and then you'd rotate the dial, you'd just get, and Dad would say, all right, now stay right there. Like you'd have to stand there. And my kids, by the way, don't believe. They asked my mom. They said, "Grandma, was there a remote control when you were little?" My mom had to tell kids there wasn't a TV when Grandma was a little girl. But here's the thing. Think about it. Think about how they watch entertainment. One, it's not limited to the house. They think you should be able to watch it on a mobile device wherever you go. Secondly, this idea you would be limited to 3 channels or watch what other people tell you to watch, what they want you to watch, when they want to watch it, is ridiculous. Third, this idea that you would watch stuff you don't like. They just fast forward. They don't watch. They get so mad during the Super Bowl. They're like, why do we have to watch commercials? Why can't we fast forward this? They're not accustomed to having to watch. They don't watch real live time TV unless it's sports. They don't watch entire shows anymore. They watch segments of shows. They get their information online. In other words, they learn how to customize their entertainment. Yet in education, we insist on this top-down, one-size-fits-all process. And I'll close with this final observation. If we really do think part of the point of education is to raise good citizens, we've got to teach them American history and civics. We've got to teach them critical thinking. We've also got to teach them values. And that's not fashionable. If you think education is all about vo-tech training, the music, the art, a lot of these things get squeezed out of the school day. And it's important to remember the whole purpose of a holistic education. But you're exactly right. Employers will tell you every day they struggle with having to teach remedial math and literacy and numeracy skills to more and more kids coming out of a factory-age, top-down educational approach. The way to change this is to empower parents in a bottom-up approach to stop this one-size-fits-all approach. Buckley famously said, to paraphrase from another school, he had more confidence in the first several names he'd find in the phone book than he would in the Harvard faculty directory. Well, I have more confidence in the moms in this room than I do in any collection of bureaucrats, whether it was those that wrote the Common Core curricula, whether it was those that think they know better than us, whether it was those that came up with No Child Left Behind. These moms trust these moms. And this is the fundamental question of the elites, because they really don't. Not all of them are as honest as that union leader. But at the core of this, what they don't want to tell you is they think they know better than you. They think you're not smart enough to educate your children. They think the reason that we oppose Common Core is we're just not as enlightened as they are. If we were just more advanced, we would know that we should let them. Look, they already want to tell us what kind of health insurance to buy. They already want to tell us you can't have religious liberty rights. They already want to tell you can't have your Second Amendment rights. So why should we be shocked? Why should we be shocked they would tell you you're not smart enough to pick the education that your children should get? They don't want you drinking big sodas. They don't think you're smart enough to know not to drink big gulps every day for breakfast. So we shouldn't be shocked. We shouldn't be shocked the elite liberals in this country, and it's not just in D.C., but across this country, think they know better than we do. I see a lot of people getting up, which means I've been talking for too long. So thank you for what you're doing to fight Common Core. We will win this fight. Thank you all very much.